makes me wonder what it might look like to be a leader for the future generations. And I'm not sure we know the answer to that yet. And whether it's unavoidable to have that hierarchy of a system in place. In my generation, we had these flat structures, but inevitably there's always needing to be somebody at the top leading the thing. That's kind of almost just how businesses work. So it'll be really interesting to see how that evolves. And maybe what it is that a younger generation wants to just lead differently and not be, the leadership style will be different.
Hello and welcome to the Plum Pod, where we talk about all things HR and mental health. I'm your host, Georgia, and founder of Access HR. Today's episode focuses on one of the most overlooked aspects of organizational leadership, succession planning. I'm joined by Amanda Waite as she shares why succession planning should be at the heart of every strategic business decision rather than it just being a tick box. Amanda, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Plum Pod here in London.
Honestly, it's a pleasure to be here.
No, honestly, pleasure is all mine. I know we had a brief conversation prior, which I definitely know will come into our topic for today. But firstly, there is a question I love to ask every single guest. And the question is, was HR part of the plan or did this happen by chance?
Absolutely by chance. I think probably almost everybody says that. They do. I'm about HR. I started my career actually in financial services. I was a mortgage advisor for the Woolwich, which no longer even exists now. And I loved it. Actually, the thing I loved about it was meeting all the different people and helping people. And then I went and worked in a complaints department for a financial services company. And again, like trying to fix problems or, that kind of is just a really good training ground, actually, I think, in the end. And then over here on this other side, my mum was actually building her business post-children. It was a childcare day nursery business. And she said to me, we're doing a multi-site thing here, starting to grow. We need someone to help with the people side of things. Would you like to come and join the business? So that's how I got into it. But the interesting thing about it was I had no qualifications in HR. And I came into an environment where there was already nursery managers. They're going, oh, you're the boss's daughter. What are you doing here? What do you know? And so I took myself off to university and got my postgraduate before I got my degree, which is a really unusual thing for people to sort of hear about.
Did you find that not having a qualification in HR affected you at all with the first role?
Yeah. You need that underpinning knowledge. So I did the level 7 leadership and management. And I did that through Anglo-Ruskin University and just sort of found myself going back to university. Was like, oh, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? But it was really necessary because of the compliance side of things. And also day nurseries are highly regulated business.
Yeah.
So partly I came in, we had to have policies. We had to have standardization of the way we kind of treated our employees and dealt with certain situations. So I had to have an understanding of that. But the level 7 qualification also gives you that strategic oversight as well of running a business. So that's really helped me underpin my career today.
And I wish I'd have done level 7. So I actually haven't got level 7. I'm chartered, but I graduated university, didn't have an HR qualification, went into an environment where I was HR. So I was by myself, and I actually found doing the level 5 at that point was really beneficial because I didn't have any base knowledge, exactly what you were just saying then. So I also went into a role, didn't have HR experience or qualification, did it alongside whilst working. And then years later down the line, I got chartered. But I did find that was helpful because I was a team of one. Were you a team of one at that point as well?
Yeah, all the way through. Being a team of one, that's a really common thing as well. And it's quite pressured because you've not really got anyone to check with.
No.
But then that's when I found people at ACAS really useful. There are, things that you can reach out to get that support. But people don't think necessarily to do that.
Yeah, completely. And for today, we're going to actually focus on something that we both are connected to, but I didn't know it until we first started speaking. And that is around succession planning, and with your experience to date with what has really helped you to build that strategy piece. Could you really break it down for me as a start? What actually is succession planning?
Well, succession planning is just making sure that you've got a contingency plan within your business, which you should have for if there's a fire, if there's a bomb threat, all of those things that you would do naturally. Well, this is one for people. And we know that a study found that 42% of CEOs leave the business suddenly. And if you don't have an assessment of the skills within your business and understand who is responsible for what, who knows what within your business, if they suddenly fall ill, if they suddenly decide to resign, because people are headhunted all the time, all of a sudden that skill set's walked out the door. And we're seeing that quite a lot where we had Brexit and COVID. All of a sudden there's this massive gap in the middle of businesses where we haven't got the talent in place anymore. Now we're like all trying to run around trying to fill that gap. That's essentially what's happened. So it's a contingency plan of the people within your business, essentially.
I love that breakdown, because also it's them future-proofing their business at the same time. Leadership needs are also evolving quite rapidly at the moment, especially with technology and advancements. It's such a good way for organizations to identify and develop their talent, but also keeping themselves really scalable.
Absolutely. So that's where it came in for me. We started off with 1 day nursery, then 2, then 3. And each time we wanted to make sure that we had a certain quality of standard. We also needed people that understood the business really well. Really that's where it came in. So we would take young girls out of college, train them up in what my mum would used to call our way. And she had a very, very particular way of doing things, but then that's why she got outstanding as a nursery provision. And she just liked things done how it was done. And it was very traditional raising children kind of way. And of course, when you get young girls coming in from college, oftentimes they didn't even know how to use a mop and mop a floor. And then they would progress through the business and they would become a room leader. They would become a deputy manager. They might become a manager. And the interesting thing around the time that I was working in it, the NNEB qualification was no longer accepted from managers. Of course, it grounded them in that side of things, but the regulations wanted them to have a management qualification. Rightly so. How many times do we see it that people get promoted because they're good at what they do, but not necessarily got the management skill set? And so this is what was recognised in the nursery world. And so I was part of that upskilling, helping them so I did the leadership and management and kind of then trained the others, managers. And so it was really fundamental, that qualification, to be able to do that. I think that's where we then had that succession planning, because when we opened a new nursery, we could almost promote the deputy up. That manager would transition across and off we go as though, nothing had happened. Not quite that easy, but that was the idea.
Have you noticed any difference with succession planning compared with like 10 years ago compared to now?
Yeah, the data. Data-driven decision making. That's quite hard to say. But yeah, we can now, we're doing a lot better at getting the data around recruitment and retention. We can more easily with technology do skills analysis, all of those sorts of things to tell a business exactly what's going on. So if you're sitting in business wondering why it is that you've got a high turnover of staff, all of those things can be analysed by HR. And we can start to understand it just by simply asking questions, by the way. It's not anything complicated, but really just keeping an eye on the skills that we've got in our organisation to understand what's going on. And of course, that takes time. It's not always recognised as an HR function, I think, but we can certainly feed back quite a lot of information because we're doing the exit recruitment, we're doing exit interviews. We've actually sitting on quite a lot of detailed knowledge and data that can help the organisation to improve. So I would say that's the key thing, because technology makes that easier.
That also makes total sense as well, because we've never had such a time where that rich data is available to us. And I'm just thinking, for anybody listening, how can we start to flex that muscle around succession planning, when you're absolutely right, it hasn't always typically been thought of as something that HR can help with. And I'm actually reflecting now on my career, and I'm thinking I avoided saying yes to succession planning because I thought it was way more complicated and super complex. And it typically then fell with the line manager, actually. But how can we start as HR professionals to support on that build?
Well, the interesting thing I think around that I've learned in the last 3 years running my own HR consultancy and business is that we as HR professionals need to have a really good understanding of how business works. And that's the thing that's propelling me forward now. I worked in a business with my mum. I've now started and run my own business, one in HR consultancy and one in business management consultancy. And I think that gets HR a place at the table in the boardroom, because I understand the finances around a business. I understand the marketing of the business. All of those various parts and components that make up the business. HR has got such a huge role to play in that if we understand it. And that's where I like the strategy stuff. There's various facets to HR, admin, employment relations, those things can happen. But for me, it's the strategy bit. And I think that's probably the best thing that I can offer now to my clients is understanding from an owner's point of view all of the things that they're going through running that business. The weight of the finances on their shoulders. If they lose a contract, the fact they're going to have to maybe get rid of staff. I understand it from their point of view because I am a business owner myself. And I think that those two things merged together offers a really good insight from our perspective. So if you're just doing HR, that's kind of where you are, and you can't really add that value. But I think now I can add so much more value by just going, oh yeah, I've walked a mile in those shoes. I understand how hard it is. And it's extremely lonely being a business owner.
It also then allows us to be more strategic. I think once you know the side of the business and where they're going, you can then be more of a partner, which I think is what so many of us are longing to be within the space. And particular for succession planning, how can we as HR roadmap for the future when we actually don't know where the business is going in terms of direction? And that's a way then we can know the end goal and then work backwards.
Absolutely, because it's all about the people in the business. Yeah. But how many times is HR excluded from that conversation? Quite often, actually. Yeah. Which is really, it's silly, isn't it? But yeah, we've got so much more to offer, so much more insight than perhaps we're given credit for. And that's partly why actually I became a chartered manager. I was sort of toying with, do I do the chartered CIPD or do I do a chartered manager? And I've kind of gone that chartered manager route to bring those two things together. And I think that recognition would be nice to have without needing to go through that.
Yeah, completely. And when I was looking into succession planning a lot in, oh my goodness. And when I was looking into succession planning, only 34% of organizations consider their succession planning to actually be effective. And I'd love to know from your opinion, why do you think that is?
Well, for just as I said, like the people that probably know how to do it aren't necessarily involved in the conversation. So a big part of succession planning, as you've said, is understanding where the business is going. Now, another thing that I see very commonly is business CEOs and the board and all of that, they head down in the operations side of it too much, especially a small business, because you're having to do everything. You wear many hats. But actually taking time to strategize, to plan, where exactly is my business going? Are we going to enter new markets? Have we got enough revenue? Where are our revenue streams coming from? Those kind of things. If the HR people can be in that conversation, we can help you not only plot the direction, but when you're working out, right, this is our route, this is our action plan, working that backwards through your management team, everybody's kind of KPIs, for want of a better word, should be aligned to that ultimate goal, but working backwards from that. So if the company's goal is headline this, the next line managers down should be working towards achieving those goals.
Yeah.
And then you come backwards another step, and their individual goals should be aligned with what that manager's and management level goals are, so that everyone from the bottom upwards, so it's a top-down process, but from the bottom upwards, we all understand the way the company's heading. And in that way, you get the buy-in. That's how you get buy-in, that's how you get engagement, that's how come a business is much more successful. But if a business doesn't take time to do that planning and strategy, then it's kind of just everyone's running around in all different directions.
It's also not giving clarity to your people, which then causes confusion, disengagement, lack of productivity. Like the ripple effect of that is actually huge. And you're absolutely right. But also the people at the top have got to be really strong and united as then it funnels down to our wider team. I'm just thinking when we're talking about the business strategy and looking ahead and knowing where we're going, the future is unwritten and a lot of organizations are potentially not sure where they're going. And from a succession planning perspective, how can we plan for a future that we're actually quite unsure of, especially with the rise of AI and roles are changing? So how can we start to build for the future when we don't exactly know what that looks like?
So my personal opinion of this is every business should have a young person working in it, because they're the future. And so if you get a younger person coming into your business, they're essentially going to be a client. So you can understand that client. So if your clients currently are a particular demographic and they're aging, let's just say as an example, well, eventually they're going to not be your clients anymore. So a younger person can come in. I mean, you're podcasting as an HR person. I love it because that's what speaks to the younger generation. This is what's getting those messages out for a business. You know, so all these different new ways of doing things, I think is what a company should be embracing. The first thing, I mean, I'm a T-Levels ambassador, and the first thing I would say if you wanted to have a T-Level student within your organisation is get them to look at your website.
Yeah.
Does it appeal to them? Simple. Now, you don't need to be going off on TikTok, which might be the other thing they'll suggest. I personally don't think you need to do that, but just the way that you're communicating with the world, does that resonate with the younger generation coming through? And believe you me, they're so fast, they're so willing to learn. They may not have all of the skills, they're not oven ready yet, but they're so eager to work. And I know way too many young people out of work that just chomping at the bit to get involved. I've had my daughter working with me in my business, which has been an absolute delight. And she's so fast. We've created so much content because she's really quick at what she does. And what she isn't so good at, which I've helped her to understand, is the business acumen. And so when we put something out, all right, it might not be perfect, but it needs to speak in a certain tone of voice, or, you know, HR needs to be quite professional. And she's learned some of those things. Now she's going off as a marketing executive for another company. She's taking all of that fantastic knowledge with her.
But that's also where collaborating cross-generationally can really help a business, and it also positions them really well. But that is where succession planning comes in, because we're also looking at, okay, who have we identified as our top assessors, essentially? Who are we going to develop? But also the thing that I'm loving with succession planning is we're not just putting that to one person anymore. We've got multiple people within an organization that we're investing in and we're preparing, because things are advancing so quickly. And if we don't do that, there is the risk as an organization that we are going to be left behind, because they're then not going to be adaptable, not going to be resilient, which will translate into everything that we do as an organization. With succession planning, though, what would you say are the key things that we can do as individuals to progress in our careers?
Yeah, I'm a lifelong learner. HR people tend to be, I think. And that's been the single best thing I've ever done. You know, I started out doing that level 7. I only last month became a chartered manager. I've done formal mentoring training. The things I've achieved actually in the last 3 years running my own business to just kind of get myself at a level where I'm really comfortable. It takes away some of that imposter syndrome. It's another really good thing to do, because so many people suffer with that. If you can get the fundamental underpinning knowledge and theory, you feel so much more confident. And then the other thing I'd say about that is, as a leader of a business, you want to be showing that you're always learning. None of us know everything. And just even we were talking about having this conversation, you're learning from me and I'm still learning from you. When you get to a point where you think, oh, you know it all, well, you know, what's the point then? So there's always something to learn, and life experience actually gives you things to learn. So I remember when I was a younger HR person, I had no experience to really empathise with a young lady that sadly lost a baby. Whereas now I'm a bit older, some of my friends have unfortunately had that experience. I'm so much more empathetic. I've been through elder care. You know, some of these things that you experience in life really help you, I think, as an HR professional, because you can actually sort of turn around to someone and say, well, hold on a minute, this is the person coming to work. It's not just the person you see before you, it's someone that experiences life outside of work. And we're very much, I like the fact that we're more aware of that these days.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think people are more conscious as individuals, and also I hope we can move much more towards a path where we are more accountable as well with that piece. I definitely still think that's an area all of us are working on. We're getting better by the day, still a long journey ahead. But when it comes to identifying and developing skills for a better future in our careers, there is that personal piece that I think a lot of people miss and potentially assume that the responsibility falls entirely on the employer. But we have that personal responsibility. Do you have any recommendations for anybody? Let's stick with HR because that's our forte. If anybody's in an HR role now and they are put on a path for succession, what would be your recommendations with what they can start to do themselves?
Well, the interesting thing, actually, this came out in my chartered manager status that I recently got, which is the self-reflection. So look at what you know, what you've done, but also what did you do in that situation and how might you do it differently? And I don't know about you, but I regularly go for a walk. If I get stuck in a situation or a thought in my head, I go for a walk and guarantee by the time I come back, I have move myself to a different place where I'm thinking about it. And that reflection time is so healthy, and sometimes run that by someone else. Again, like we have so many HR groups, and I love that we're a very collaborative community. No one's really afraid to put their hand up and say, oh, does anyone know the answer to this? Because it can be so nuanced and complicated, and no one is judged for that. And at the same time, I think you have trusted colleagues where you can say to them, this is where I'm at with this particular point of my life. What do you recommend? And people are always willing to help. And one thing I've found, people always willing to help and give you the benefit of their experience. So that's been really lovely. And I think that self-reflection is going to be really helpful to anybody. So also by that, I think I mean, where am I at now? Where do I want to be? And what individual steps might I need to take to achieve that? And it might not come overnight. Be prepared to be patient to achieve that. So those are the sorts of things I think that someone could just sit and reflect about, where they want to go in life if they're stuck, or how can I improve where I'm at in the future, and see it as a journey. It doesn't matter where you end up, actually. Another thing I say to people all the time, especially youngsters, nobody, I don't think, ever finishes their career in the first job they started, do they? It's a journey.
Yeah, completely. And I'm also just thinking, like, I have been very guilty of not reflecting. Like, a situation will happen, I will just sit at my desk, I'll get foggy, I will get frustrated, I will be so in the moment. Whereas now I'm moving more towards where I do step away. Like, if I have a difficult conversation, I will get away from my desk, but I also build that into my calendar. So if I know a meeting is happening, I've now got that buffer in between rather than back to back, because I'm actually not being productive throughout any of that. But also I'm not growing because I'm not reflecting. And that's definitely helping me much more. It's taken me ages to get to that point, but that's allowing me to be a better professional.
Absolutely does, because you're just giving yourself that time and space to, think, because there's lots of heavy conversations in HR. And actually, we don't have supervision, funnily enough, which psychologists do and things like that. And sometimes I think, gosh, should we have supervision in this profession?
I didn't have my first I didn't have my first supervision until I was about 7 years into my career.
Yeah.
yet we're the ones making sure our managers have them, but I didn't.
Yeah, that's right. Of course, often they're standalone HR. We've said about that, and you're like, who do you turn to? Because it's a bit like a firing squad sometimes, and you're like, oh my goodness. I love the question about how do you prioritise your work when you go, and it's like, well, everything's important in HR, isn't it?
Let's sit down and talk about it, and I'll let you know. So you were talking then around, for us as HR professionals, a piece of succession planning is we need to self-identify, where do we want to go? What skills do we want to learn? And what does that look like? The future is very exciting, in my opinion. There's a lot of advancements and a lot of changes that are happening. And I would just love to know from your perspective, what do you think are the skills that we could be looking to work on as HR professionals to be more successful in our careers for the future?
Oh, that's a really, really good question, because soft skills is a big hot topic right now. So communication. I did some workplace mediator training and found that the communication skills that I developed through that training is really, really good. So that helps me with things like conflict resolution, but also empathy. So understanding, where somebody's coming from, the different perspective. And you've got quite highly attuned to that to be in HR, because someone will come to you with a problem and it's not necessarily the problem at all. There's some underlying issues that are going on with that. And often people that go off sick, for example, that's not just necessarily the physical symptoms, could be emotional symptoms as well. So I think that would help. And then also the one that's really been identified by a lot of the local skills improvement plans that are being done around the country, leadership skills, leadership and management skills, which is partly why I've called my company what I have. And it's just identifying that so commonly people get promoted into a job and they don't necessarily have the people management skills and the leadership skills that they need, because companies don't necessarily train people on that, and it's really lacking. And so when you think about how much regulation there is now in the workplace to do with employees, and you're expecting HR to solve the problem, well, we don't have necessarily access directly to a team. The best person to deal with that is the manager of that team. So our job really is to train those managers to be good managers. And we need to be given the resources and time to do that. But it's often missed completely. And the amount of times I speak to senior leaders that are really out of their depth with regard to dealing with people, they're just, I can't be bothered, don't want to know about it, whatever. It's like, that this is your company. The people are your company.
We're also in a time where 82% of managers are actually considered accidental managers, which means they're really great at what they do. They've got the skills. They then progressed more senior, they moved into a managerial role, but they actually haven't had the training for how to be an effective people leader. Because it's great being good at what you do, managing people, it's an entirely different remit of skills that there is such a gap in between. But then also the impact of that is it's having an impact on people where 75% of Gen Z don't want to go into a managerial role because they've seen what managers are like and they're like, I don't want any of that.
Yeah,
I just want to be a specialist at what I do.
Yeah.
I don't want to manage people.
I've seen that. I've seen there's that shift and that change. And it makes me wonder what it might look like to be a leader for the future generations. And I'm not sure we know the answer to that yet. And whether it's unavoidable to have that hierarchy of a system in place. I know we've sort of, in my generation, we had these flat structures, but inevitably there's always needing to be somebody at the top leading the thing. That's kind of almost just how businesses work. So it'll be really interesting to see how that evolves. And maybe what it is that a younger generation wants to just lead differently and not be, the leadership style will be different. Maybe that's really what everybody's getting at, because an older generation of leader might be quite authoritarian. Whereas I think we don't want to be too laissez-faire with the younger generation, but I think that there needs to be some sort of meeting in the middle of, sometimes it is messy being a manager. Sometimes you've got to make hard decisions, and we need to build resilience for people to be able to do that, because I see that's quite lacking sometimes. That resilience of people there. It's not easy firing people. It's not easy disciplining people. It's probably the worst part of the job. And you just have to build that resilience, which is where that self-reflection, like you've done, that time in your calendar to go for a walk and just sort of almost shake it off. That's really important, to just be able to manage yourself in those situations. And they're just really simple things and examples you can give to managers. But when they're being called from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, that's not healthy for them either. So this is where we need to have just a better understanding of what we're expecting of people and how much demand we're putting on them.
They're also the unsung heroes of an organisation, often the ones that are forgotten about.